Welcome back to MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. We're coming to you on the Plus as well as on Facebook at News Channel 5. If you want to join us, talking about voter turnout in the upcoming election, specifically kind of looking at the minority vote and what a key role it's going to play likely in the election of the next president. With us is Dr. Brian Russell, Political Science Professor at TSU. And Professor, we've got a few phone calls. Why don't we get a few of those out of the way as we continue to talk about what we see in primarily the African American and Hispanic voting blocks. And we'll go to Joe. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Nick. I'd like to ask the professor what he sees in the absentee ballot situation that we're in. Trump has tried his best to kill people from voting absentee ballots, and he's even made the statement that if you don't think your vote's been counted, go to the poll and vote at the poll, which is completely illegal because you'd be voting twice, possibly. They don't want, for some reason or another, he doesn't want the absentee ballots situation because there's a lot of people that can't go to the polls for different reasons. And I'd like for him to address that.
Okay, good. To see what, Professor, have you put some thought into, how things are setting up with absentee ballots? And different states have got different rules. Tennessee, maybe not as far as some other states. What do you think?
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for that question. And when we start talking and thinking about voting, you brought up a good point. And when we think about voting, that gives us a chance to highlight our federal system. Right. And when we think about voting, most of us think that we have one country with the government in control in Washington and making all the decision. But this highlights our federal system, and states are, independent sovereigns within our federal system. And voting is something that happens at the state level, and it's controlled at the state level. So we have 50 different voting systems across the country. And the caller asked about absentee voting and mail-in voting, and is talking about how Trump is against absentee voting. I think technically Trump is actually supportive of absentee voting, but he's against mail-in voting. And the difference between those two is going to be in an absentee voting situation. I'm a voter, and I was planning on voting, but for some reason I can't be at the polls. I'm going to be out of town. I'm sick. I'm having an operation. And then so I specifically contact our Secretary of State's office, and then I specifically say, I'm planning on voting. Please send me a ballot. That's absentee voting. And President Trump is supportive of that. He has been trying to make a distinction between absentee voting and mail-in voting. And absentee is that situation where you're specifically requesting a ballot, and a ballot's being sent to you. Mail-in voting is where the state is just going to send ballots out to everyone, and President Trump has been expressing concern about that. And when we talk about mail-in voting, only a handful of states typically do mail-in voting regularly. It's like 5 states. It's like Colorado, Utah, Hawaii. There's like 5 states out west that specifically do all of their voting for mail-in. And this is something that they've been doing for some time period now, and they have the infrastructure put into place, and they do mail-in voting. Most states don't do universal mail-in voting, but most states will have an absentee system where you can specifically request an absentee ballot. And what has been happening because of the coronavirus is states have been expanding their absentee voting to be no-fault absentee. So theoretically, normally I would have to have a reason to be absent, but most states are accepting the coronavirus as a reason. Tennessee, interestingly enough, is one of the states that is not doing that. And then so we do not have no excuse absentee voting. We do have absentee voting, but you can only do it for a specific reason. It's not universal. Right. So the caller was asking Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you're right. Just wanted to piggyback on that Tennessee. Basically, in Tennessee, one of the big reasons we're seeing, this spike in the idea of doing mail-in voting is that every time you go to a polling place these days, there's a long line and a crowd. And with COVID-19, there's people maybe that want to vote, but for whatever reason, they just don't want to risk going and standing in a long line with a bunch of other people. In Tennessee, that's not going to be reason enough unless you have, I guess, and can prove some kind of severe illness that really does put you at risk. And so I worry that that's going to keep some people at home.
That is going to make a difference. And when we talk a little bit more about, the turnout for this coming election, the coronavirus is definitely going to have a big role to play in that. And we are only one of like 5 states that haven't moved towards allowing the universal absentee voting. And then so it's going to be harder in Tennessee. Now, when we talk about that, right, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about voter suppression in a little bit, right? Some people are going to make the argument that this is an attempt at voter suppression, right? Not allowing everybody to no excuse absentee vote, right? But there's also a political culture and an idea, people that support in-person voting and don't want to move into mail-in voting. There is the idea that if we all vote on the same day and we all go down, and you were talking about long lines, but if we all go down and participate, that's part of the civic process. That's part about us being involved in politics. So sometimes it's portrayed as an attempt to try to lessen voter participation, and there's probably some legitimate claims to that. But there is also the idea of democracy and the idea of people going out and participating together and being a part of the civic process. So when people are saying, I don't want mail-in or absentee and I want everybody to vote on the same day, sometimes that's portrayed as voter suppression, and there is an element of that. But there is also a side in our politics where people are saying, that the vote day is something that is sacred and it's part of something nationwide where we're all coming together as a community. So when some people blow back on that, some people are making nefarious claims, and maybe some of that is there. But there's also a side where people are saying that we want people to participate in politics and to participate in the community. And so that's the debate that's going on. And our state is not allowing no excuse absentee voting. And of course, that's the law, right? That's the law that's been established by the legislature. And then that would have to be something that is changed.
We've got another phone call. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, I was going to say about the other caller, he is calling in. And then so in the media, they have been trying to say that mail-in voting and absentee are the same thing. And they're not the same thing. And President Trump is making the claim that universal mail-in voting is something different than absentee because it's not a specific voter requesting that ballot, but they're just sending the ballots out to registered voters. And like I was saying earlier, only like 5 or 6 states permanently have all mail-in voting. So all the other states don't really have the infrastructure in place to deal with that. And then so moving people to mail-in voting is going to add complications to the process. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but overwhelmingly, Republicans are going to be voting in person, and overwhelmingly, Democrats are going to be tending to vote through mail-in ballot, and this is going to cause other complications.
All right, let's take a call next from Randy. Randy, good morning. Hi, Randy.
Hey, good morning, Nick.
Morning. What's on your mind?
I'll make it short and quick. What it is, they're going to have a Trump rally at Rock Creek here at Lewisburg, September 26th. I got no problem with any kind of rally, whether it be Biden, Trump, or whatever, but they're going to have a parade after that or before that, and I got a problem with that because we didn't have a 4th of July parade. We didn't have a parade for the homecoming, and I found out we're not going to have a Christmas parade, and that's not fair to all these children going to school, risking their lives getting the coronavirus because they already started the school and 2 epidemics done happened. And I think the mayor is over this. I'm not quite sure who's over this, but it's
Well, I'll say this. I don't want to get too far off base on this. Look, if individuals want to put on a parade as opposed to some of these that are sponsored by local municipalities, it's a different ball game, and they can choose to do so. I guess I want to ask you, maybe coming out of that question a bit, I'm not sure where that question was going, but Professor, do you think functions like rallies, parades, which is something, again, the president is very big on, and we see Joe Biden doing some of that as well through social media virtually. Does that go a long way, and maybe throw debates into this as well, in spurring more voter turnout or not, having events like that?
Well, when we're talking about that, campaign rallies and events, that does increase voter turnout, right? when we look at the two campaigns right now, there's a lot more people excited about Donald Trump than excited about Joe Biden. And I think we would all agree that having campaign rallies is kind of what Donald Trump does, right? And what it does, Nick, is when you go around and you have these events, what it does is, it builds. When you have that rally and everybody's there, the excitement builds and that energizes people. And so when that rally is over, those people go out into the community and they're fired up and they're more likely to come out and vote in the future. And that's something that the Biden campaign is losing, right? They have been trying to strictly follow coronavirus protocols. And so they haven't been having these big type of events. And the fear is that in this upcoming election cycle, not having those events will be something that might affect participation rates. And so Trump is going to these rallies and his supporters are coming out and they're getting fired up. They're getting energized. And basically, really, prior to the 2000 election cycle, there used to be this idea that candidates would, in the primary run to their party and in the general election, they would move to the middle. And President Bush in 2000 kind of moved in a model where, as opposed, not that you don't try to appeal to people in the middle, but presidential elections have become a lot more about exciting your base and getting your base supporters out, getting your team out to show up. And so I think Trump has made a decision that, for lack of a better word, that's like his special sauce, going out to crowds and energizing him. And that's what's going to make a difference on election day, is whether or not your core supporters, your base, your party supporters show up. And these kind of rallies tend to ignite and excite those voters. You can see it when you see the coverage of it. It sure does. Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, more of the phone calls, more of our conversation about where we go, and we'll look more in depth into the role that the African American and Hispanic voting core will play in the election of the next president. We'll be back right after this.
This is a Storm 5